Thanks, Anthony. I wish we could dedicate a whole hour to that pig story. Maybe on a later program. As you can see, joining me via Skype is David Pietro. But David, I need you to stand by because we are going to talk about a major case. We are going to talk about the Shaun Harrison case out of Massachusetts. Oh, where's my manners? The Reverend Shaun Harrison case out of Massachusetts, because that's really what makes this so unique. A reverend, a Boston pastor, is currently on trial for attempted murder, the attempted murder of a high school student named Luis Rodriguez. Now, according to the prosecution's theory, Mr. Harrison was leading a double life. He wasn't just a reverend, he wasn't just a dean at a high school, but he was a drug dealer, and he elicited students to help him in the drug trade. Mr. Rodriguez was one of those students. According to the prosecution, there was a dispute over decreased drug sales, decreased marijuana sales. Mr. Harrison got upset and wanted to kill Mr. Rodriguez. And the jury saw this video, this footage of what looked like a shooting. Can't tell that it's Mr. Harrison, but a shooting that took place. And Mr. Rodriguez took the stand. He survived the shooting, took the stand last week. Says the person you saw in that video is Mr. Harrison. He tried to shoot me, shot me right in the head. I survived. Really unbelievable case. But to do it justice, we have a report about what has happened so far in this case. Take a look. This is the Shaun Harrison trial.
The trial of a popular street pastor from Boston, who authorities claim lived a double life running a drug dealing ring, will resume this week. 58-year-old Reverend Shaun Harrison allegedly shot Luis Rodriguez in the back of the head in 2015.
Who shot you in the back of the head?
Mr. Shaun Harrison did.
Authorities reportedly have obtained surveillance camera footage that shows Harrison shooting Rodriguez. Luckily, Rodriguez, who was 17 years old at the time, survived the shooting. Harrison was mentoring Rodriguez before he recruited him to sell marijuana and allegedly shot him after a dispute. Upon searching his home, investigators found guns, ammunition, and large bags of marijuana. Rodriguez testified last week on the second day of trial, detailing how in a span of a month he went from being mentored by Harrison to selling weed for him to being shot by him execution style. Prosecutors alleged Harrison shot Rodriguez due to his slumping drug sales. On cross-examination, defense attorney Bruce Carroll pressed Rodriguez on his prior history with drug sales and why he didn't immediately identify Harrison as the shooter. Harrison faces several counts, including armed assault to murder and illegal possession of drugs, firearms, and ammunition. I'm Anthony Velez for Law and Crime.
Thank you, Anthony. Great report there on the major case we're covering here on the Law and Crime Network, the Reverend Shaun Harrison case. But there's a lot of open questions here, including what is the defense's best strategy? Well, let's talk about it now with criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor David Pietro. David, what is the defense's best strategy? Because we talk so much about what the prosecution has. They found guns, ammo, large bags of marijuana in Mr. Harrison's room, in his home. We have testimony from two witnesses who say that he was a drug dealer and said that one says that he shot him, and then one witness, Mr. Rodriguez, the victim, says that he was shot by Harrison. You have another witness, Mr. Perez, who says that he asked him to shoot Rodriguez. So it's pretty incriminating testimony. What's the defense going to do here? What's their best strategy?
It's like many other cases. It's a whodunit. Maybe it was somebody else. Maybe it wasn't the defendant on charge. It was Perez. It was another person. That might be one angle. And the second angle is that I've seen in these cases, and I've seen successfully and from time to time, is a jury nullification where basically the jury doesn't know who to believe and doesn't feel sympathetic for anybody and just enters a not guilty. Because they think that the victim is really not a victim and the witnesses are really not credible and they don't know what to do. So that's probably the two angles I see coming out of this case potentially.
And these witnesses, so Mr. Perez as well as the victim, they said, look, they did drugs, they smoked marijuana. Mr. Perez said he lied to investigators initially. Why should the jury believe them?
That's the main thing that the defense is bringing out. They live an alternative lifestyle of crime and doing bad things, and they didn't report it to authorities. This could have been avoided had they done so, and they're culpable in some level themselves. They committed violence on the victim at one point. So it makes the case difficult for the prosecution because they're dealing with bad actors, so to speak, on their side as well. I mean, a crime is a crime, but you know, when drug dealers get shot, I mean, it's still a crime, but your drug dealer is not the best victim. It's not your
saying this. So let's, what we're going to do right now is the jury is on a sight view. I'm waiting for the live feed to go back in the courtroom. We have some really critical testimony that happened earlier in this case. This is from a woman named Chelsea Pietro. She was Shaun Harrison's neighbor. Now, this is an interesting perspective. This is somebody who lived by the defendant. Maybe she had some good insight into what kind of person the Rev really was. Take a look.
at some point.
It's not somebody that everybody sees, you know, he put on a facade. We've seen articles about this man written in the Boston area, the Massachusetts area, and it's very interesting to see about him because when you look at the back history of him and what he's like, it should be noted he was going to be fired from that high school where he was a dean at, or one of the deans, for allegedly shoving a female student. He also has this weird history with the clergy. Apparently, it's alleged that his son might have been sexually molested by a clergyman. So when you look at somebody, he's portraying a certain image, and it's really up to the prosecution to say, well, wait a second, this is not the guy that he's portraying himself as, right?
Right, humanize him, make him a likable person, and make him a normal person, not this evil bad guy that the prosecutors are portraying, that was a drug dealer, was taking advantage of children, and using the clergy hood as in a disgraceful way for his own self gain. So it's a good way to make him look like a funny, likable person.
Well, let's learn a little bit more about him, because Chelsea Pietro continued her testimony talking a little bit more about this man and a little bit more about their apartment complex. So let's see what we can learn about the Reverend, or the Rev, Shaun Harrison. Learning some interesting things right there about the defendant in this Reverend Shaun Harrison case out of Massachusetts. Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. That's the case that we're covering here. Shaun Harrison, this Reverend out of Massachusetts, who is on trial for many different crimes, including drug charges, gun charges, as well as the attempted murder of a high school student named Luis Rodriguez, who it's claimed that Mr. Harrison tried to kill him, shot him in the back of the head execution style back in 2015. And the reason? Because, as you were just hearing from Chelsea Pietro, Mr. Harrison's neighbor, this guy was really a drug dealer, that he was involved in drugs, that his apartment smelled like marijuana. We've heard witnesses say that he had marijuana in his office at the school where he was one of the deans. And this guy was leading a double life as a drug dealer, hired Rodriguez, the victim, to sell drugs for him. They got into a dispute, and he wanted him dead. Let's bring back in David Pietro. So, David, we're listening to the testimony of Chelsea Pietro. We're learning some interesting things. We're learning that there's a lot of traffic in and out of his apartment. We're learning that his apartment smelled of cigarettes and weed. And then we learn a little bit about the storage bins in their apartment complex. What do you make of this testimony?
Well, I guess he's a nice guy, right? That's what I think the point of it was. He's offering a lock to his neighbor, and you know, like a good neighbor. I think that's probably what they're trying to pull out. And you know, and I guess marijuana these days is really taken a less of a criminal look at by society. So I'm not sure. Obviously, for children, it's still looked at as bad, but like alcohol. But I'm not sure how damning that is. But it's interesting testimony. I think it's trying to put make him look like a personable character, the Rev.
Well, David, I smiled. Our listeners couldn't see, because that storage bin, there's a little bit of a larger story about what was found in it after the shooting. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in a minute. We're learning that the Reverend Shaun Harrison is not the good Reverend, or the wholesome Reverend, as he always claims to be. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network and Law and Crime on Sirius XM Radio. I'm Jesse Weber, covering this case for you right now. So they are in a break in the live feed. As soon as we have it, we'll make sure to go back into that courtroom. Reverend Shaun Harrison is on trial for many crimes, including the attempted murder of a high school student named Luis Rodriguez. It's claimed that Mr. Harrison was leading a double life as a drug dealer, enlisted Rodriguez as one of his sales associates to sell marijuana. They got into a dispute about decreased sales Mr. Harrison wasn't too happy about it and wanted him dead. And how did he do it? Well, the prosecution says that he fired a gun at the back of Mr. Rodriguez's head, almost killed him, but he survived and ran away. And he survived, and then he testified earlier in this case that Harrison was the shooter. Let's bring back in criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor David Pietro. So, David, we're listening to Chelsea Padano, and she's saying they smoke together, they smoke marijuana. Is the idea here just to put in the, if the jury just hears once that this reverend is not the wholesome person that he claims to be, that might not be enough to say, hey, he's guilty of murder, but it's enough for them to start listening, right?
Marijuana, though, is lost its gravitas for prosecutors. So I'm not sure how deep the effect is, other than he's not this pure, wholesome character that a reverend in our society should be. So I'm not sure how it exactly plays one way or another.
What are his options here? Can he's charged with many different crimes. Do you think maybe the attempted murder case is a lot weaker than maybe the gun charges or the drug charges? And maybe he could be found guilty of those, but not the charges related to the attempted murder?
Right. And also, you know, intertwining the two cases together, the drug case and the murder case, is probably an appealable issue, because I gather the defense did not want both tried together unless they had some theory or some reason to have that done, because normally you don't want to have those kinds of counts intertwined, because it could lead to the jury just thinking you're a bad actor.
That's 100% true. Well, we're learning a lot from Chelsea Padano, his neighbor. As I keep teasing, they had these storage bins in their apartment. Well, what was found in these storage compartments after the Luis Rodriguez shooting? Take a look. Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. Did you hear that? I hope you did, because that's what we're covering. We're covering the Shaun Harrison case, and we just learned something very interesting. For anybody just joining us, Reverend Shaun Harrison is on trial for many different crimes, but really the main crux of the argument put forward by the prosecution is that he's on trial for the attempted murder of a high school student named Luis Rodriguez. It's argued that Harrison shot Rodriguez in the back of the head back in 2015, and he did it because of decreasing drug sales. That's right, the prosecution believes that Harrison was leading a double life as a drug dealer, enlisted Rodriguez as one of his sales associates. They had a dispute over drug sales, and he shot him back in the head, execution style. Well, what did we just learn from Chelsea Padano in that clip? Chelsea Padano was a neighbor of Shaun Harrison during the time of the shooting. And she said after the shooting, she opened up her storage container and she found this black bag with articles of clothing on it, including a red and blue shirt and a pea coat. Let's bring back in David Pietro. So what do you make of that? She opens up her storage bin and she finds these articles of clothing. Doesn't belong to her. What do you think about it?
It doesn't look good, right? Maybe he wasn't such a friendly neighbor offering his lock for a locker bin. So it's interesting how the whole storyline is getting weaved together.
Now, I don't know if we've confirmed as of yet if those were the clothes that he wore the night of the shooting, but when you have a guy, is this become a case of just a culmination of a lot of evidence? You find these clothes in her bin. His apartment reeks of marijuana and cigarettes. There's his guns, ammunition are also found at his apartment, including marijuana. His office, it's alleged that he sold marijuana in the school where he was a dean. You have two witnesses coming forward saying that he was a drug dealer. One witness saying that he shot him in the back of the head. And you have another witness who says that he asked me to kill Luis Rodriguez. So you have this culmination of evidence. When the defense eventually gets their case, the prosecution rests, what kind of witnesses are they going to call, if any?
Well, I think what the prosecution's doing, although they don't need to prove it, they're proving motive, and that he's actually the person, and here's why. Although you don't need to prove that, it's very helpful for the jury to understand from a logical standpoint. I think the defense is going to try to do the opposite and paint him out to be the Rev and somebody who helped children in the community. And yeah, maybe he liked marijuana, but he wasn't a bad guy, and he wasn't involved in all this. And this is all, taken out of context, and that the prosecution really has painted him to be somebody he's really not.
Well, David, I'm going to ask you the million-dollar question when we come back from our short break. Will this man, the Rev, take the stand? We'll be back in a minute. Thank you, Anthony. That was a great report there on the Shaun Harrison case. I want to bring back in right now criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor David DiPietro. I asked you before the break that I was going to tell you, this is the million-dollar question. Will Shaun Harrison, the Rev, take the stand?
Put my green on the mahogany. If the prosecution's right that he's this mastermind, sort of narcissistic individual, I will bet that he will take the stand.
Really? You will? And what do you think we would see if he took the stand?
He's going to say it wasn't him. He wasn't the shooter. And that's probably the best shot he's got, because that's the doubt that might hang up the case. It might get him convicted on the other counts, but those carry a lot less time than the one for attempted murder.
And what about when he went all these accusations? Your apartment smelled like marijuana. Your office had marijuana in it. Why were there guns, ammunition, and marijuana found in your home? Why do we have multiple witnesses coming forward and saying that you were a drug dealer? Why do we have a witness coming forward and saying you asked this person to kill Luis Rodriguez? What do you say to Luis Rodriguez, the person, the victim who testified in this case? How does Shaun Harrison answer this?
I think he cops up to being a marijuana user and tries to minimize the rest. Narcissistic people, they believe their own story and their own narrative. So it might be on his testimony, if he does testify, will be pretty incredible.
That's an understatement. I think it would be pretty incredible to watch that, because he's done interviews from jail and he says, "I'm not the drug dealer, I'm the Rev." So it's an interesting case, a unique case. Now, David, stand by. I want to play some more of the testimony of Chelsea Padano. This is the neighbor, okay? This is the neighbor of Shaun Harrison. And before our last break, what did she discover in her storage bin after the Luis Rodriguez shooting? She discovered a black bag with articles of clothing in it. And one of those was a pea coat. Now, that didn't belong to her. And why does that matter? Because this shooting happened in the wintertime. It happened outside. So was this Shaun Harrison's clothing? Was he trying to get rid of it after the shooting? Maybe. Let's hear what happened. This is Chelsea Padano. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network, everybody, and Law and Crime on Sirius XM Radio. We're covering the Shaun Harrison case out of Massachusetts, a Boston reverend who is on trial for attempted murder of a high school student back in 2015. It's alleged that he tried to shoot him, did shoot him, execution style in the back of the head, but the victim survived. Now it becomes a question about who was this reverend? Who is this reverend? He seemed to be living a normal life, an exemplary life, and all of a sudden he's not only accused of being an attempted murderer, but a sinister drug dealer, operating this entire drug enterprise, seemingly from the high school where he worked as one of the deans. Let's bring back on David DiPietro. That's one of the most interesting things about this case, is that whatever he's convicted of, if he's convicted of anything, whatever the result of the ultimate trial is, which we're covering here on Law and Crime, the idea that he's been accused in the first place, people in the community were shocked by this. This was not the guy that they knew. This was not the Boston pastor, the anti-violence guy, the anti-gang guy. This is somebody they really don't even suspect. What did you make of that? The idea that this was just a completely 180 for a person.
Well, we see it all the time in our society, right? I mean, we see politicians, they go down in scandal. We see remember the Tiger Woods. Nobody ever thought that. That came out of the blue. So, yeah, people are shocked, but I think in the world we live in digital media, communications, nothing's shocking to anybody anymore.
But a pastor who's running a drug enterprise and also has tried to commit murder?
Yeah, and priests that molest children, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff that's come out over the years. It's not tucked away anymore. So I think the shock level is, it's probably there for people who knew him, but for people who didn't know him but knew of him, probably it's just another scandal.
It's just another scandal. I got to ask you this, though. We talked about it earlier in the program about common sense. So why would a guy who wanted to kill someone, I'm going to ask you these questions. If he really wanted to kill Luis Rodriguez, his drug associate, this high school student, why shoot him in a public area, okay? Why tell other students that you are going to kill him? And why would you take your clothes that you shot him in, put them in a bin and put them in a bag and put them in the storage bin of your neighbor? I mean, these are questions that I have for somebody who's a calculated drug enterprise mastermind. Why would you do these kinds of things unless, of course, someone in this case is not being accurate?
He's not on trial for being smart. So,
That's fair.
Yeah. So maybe, he did it because he just didn't really think it out. And he did it in rage and just fell through a level of stupidity in the whole thing.
Maybe that's what it is. Maybe. Or, as I said, maybe someone in this case is not being entirely truthful. What we're going to do right now, so just to let anybody know who's just joining us, the jury is on a site view right now. They are on a visit. They are looking at the crime scene where this shooting took place. That's why we don't have a live feed right now. As soon as they come back to court, we'll make sure to go. In the meantime, I want to finish out the testimony of Chelsea Padano. This is when she was contacted after Mr. Harrison's arrest. Again, a pivotal witness. This is somebody who had interactions with the defendant. She said she smoked weed with the defendant, and she found this mysterious clothing in her storage bin after the shooting. Let's hear what more she had to say about this really, really bizarre series of events. That was the testimony of Chelsea Padano in the Reverend Shaun Harrison case. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network and Law and Crime on Sirius XM Radio. I'm Jesse Weber. So Chelsea Padano is testifying about her neighbor, Reverend Shaun Harrison, the defendant. And she mentioned a lot of interesting things, but her conversation right there was after Harrison's arrest. Now remember, Harrison's on trial for attempting to murder a high school student named Luis Rodriguez by shooting him in the back of the head. Let's bring back in David Pietro, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor. I don't know what to make of this last testimony, that she was contacted by someone named Ace after Shaun Harrison was arrested. If I'm sitting on the jury, what do I make of that?
Well, I guess who's Ace and why is Ace contacting her other than for reasons that are not good? So I think that's probably what they're intertwining. Who calls himself Ace? It's like the Rev, Ace. These are all characters out of a novel. Yeah, it's a little bizarre. Again, I feel like the prosecution can't get it both ways, right? So they can't say, hey, he's a mastermind, he's trying to cover his tracks, when he does all these kinds of things that implicate him. I mean, you can't say, I'm not a criminal mastermind, and then all of a sudden, at his apartment are guns, ammo, marijuana. He tells two people that he's going to kill Luis Rodriguez. I mean, I guess I'm confused here. Am I supposed to think he's the stupidest drug dealer in the world, that he's able to operate this entire enterprise at the same time implicating himself numerous times? Or is this somebody who's wrongfully accused? Is that a possibility, that the two main witnesses we have are the victim and Kevin Perez, who's another student at the school, who says that he was befriended by Mr. Harrison to enter into this illegal operation? I mean, are we just supposed to believe that this is this criminal mastermind, or maybe are they not being entirely truthful? Well, or maybe the prosecution's overselling who he really is. Maybe he's just a low-level drug dealer who's a fraud and somewhat of a dummy. And maybe that's a better theory than him being the kingpin mob boss of the churches in South Boston. But
doesn't that sound so much better? The kingpin of the churches. I mean, that's really, I said, it's something out of Breaking Bad. You have a guy who was leading a regular life, and then all of a sudden, you see what he is. I mean, this is pretty incredible to watch. David, we have a lot more to talk about in this case, so I want you to stand by. In the meantime, for anybody just joining us, we have the top crime stories of the day here on Law and Crime. Take a look. Thanks, Anthony. I could play that all day, and I'll never get tired of it. The pig following somebody could be one of my favorite stories I've ever heard, not just here on Law and Crime, but probably my life. Again, this is Jesse Weber. You're joining us here on Law and Crime on Sirius XM Radio, channel 109. Now, we can cover pig stories and canine stories, and it'd be great. But we have a story, the case that we've been following, so anybody who just tuned in, this is your lucky day. This is your lucky minute. We are covering the Reverend Shaun Harrison case. It is a bizarre tale out of Massachusetts. We have a report by, again, Anthony Velez, talking about what this case is about. Take a look. All right, that is a case that we are covering here on Law and Crime. Now, the live feed we had earlier, we don't have now because the jury is going to a crime scene visit. They are looking at where that shooting took place, and they're examining it for themselves. When they return back to the courtroom and we have the live feed, we'll make sure to go to it. But in the meantime, there's a lot to analyze in this case because of the bizarre nature of it. So let's bring in one last time criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor David Pietro. If this is true, if this dean is really an attempted murderer, that he is a drug kingpin, how does this guy go into the school system? Because he was one of the deans at the English high school where he recruited his associates. How does someone get into the school system like this?
Yeah, that's a bigger question, right? I think we're finding out a lot about our school security in this country, from Parkland to Houston to everything. And I think we're having this national discussion about schools being sterile zones or not. Meaning, are they treated like airports and courthouses, or are they open areas for people to come in and commit various crimes? So I think that's an interesting issue that's going to become a sort of a national issue in this next election and for years to come.
And we see it not just with clergymen or let me rephrase, reverends turned drug kingpins, but we see it with, sexual abuse going on in schools. So, I mean, you have a guy, how could he hide in plain sight? How could he fool an entire school system? How could he fool an entire community? Unless, of course, this is all a lie. Unless, of course, everybody who's come forward is making this up to save themselves. I mean, we had on camera, we had the footage of one of the high school students attack the victim. We have that. We see it. And we also see this footage of when the shooting took place, but we don't know who this is. So it's very interesting to see, and we'll have to see how it goes. David, thank you so much for joining us. It was great having you on.
Thanks, gang. Have a great day.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, here's what we're going to do. I am going to be signing off, but your next host is coming on, Carissa Kranz, and she is going to guide you through the Shaun Harrison case. We'll be back in a minute.